So I just revisited Thor: Love and Thunder, and this movie is not anywhere near as good as I remember. I remember leaving Thor: Love and Thunder from the theaters thinking that was a pretty good movie. It was funny, I loved the music, and I ultimately had a great time with my wife because we're both relatively fairly big Thor fans in the MCU. Now, she is a way bigger fan of Thor than I am, so much so that it's just her favorite character in all of Marvel history. So overall, she probably still has a much better opinion of this movie than I do. But after revisiting it a second time, I gotta say, I just need to crap on Thor for a little bit. Welcome back, and if you're new here, welcome. On this channel, we talk all things video games and comic books. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode like this. So before we go into how Thor: Love and Thunder actually failed as a sequel to the ongoing Thor movies, we gotta go back to Ragnarok, which, again, this is an argument that's been made many times, but honestly, it still holds true. Ragnarok is a far better movie than Love and Thunder, and is honestly the best Thor movie overall. Ragnarok not only changed the game of who Thor is as a character, completely subverted our expectations of this Shakespearean Thor that we've previously seen that every now and then breaks out a humorous joke. This movie completely changed the game to where he was just a straight up comedy act, but it still held real stakes, still held real emotion, and overall carried through with a very solid plotline. None of these things can be said for Love and Thunder. So, Love and Thunder took what we were already expecting, which was the comedy aspect, and pretty much focused on just that. At the end, they tried to shoe in some sense of emotion with the passing of Jane Foster. However, honestly, it just wasn't really earned given that this was a 2-hour comedy show with a 1-minute segment of real emotion. I think that bringing back Jane Foster in the way that they did with the cancer storyline was a bit coming out of left field, but it was appropriate since it was pulling from the comics, and ultimately it kind of made sense. The challenge with this movie is that it took Thor, who previously had amazing character arc that honestly I'm a big fan of who he was in Endgame. I thought that Endgame Thor was peak Thor. That is a hot take since many people think that Infinity War was peak Thor, especially when he came down with Stormbreaker and just "Bring me Thanos." That line was just incredible, and not to take away from that moment, which was amazing, I think that Endgame Thor really took him to the next level. It brought a deeper level of emotion and brought a deeper level of just self-worth and self-identity of who Thor is as a character. And ultimately, at the end of the movie, when he found peace with who he is today, wielding both Stormbreaker and Mjolnir, finding that he's still worthy, still able to completely decimate his opponents in just the final battle with the whole armies going against Thanos' army. He was honestly able to really hold his own. But then the end of the movie happens. He goes off with the Guardians. That left us off with a potential great movie of, as some would say, the Asgardians of the Galaxy. That would have been great to see Thor's adventure with the Guardians and just ultimately where that would have ended up. I personally think that would have been a great Guardians 3 movie, although the one that we got was phenomenal. I wouldn't have changed it, but I still think that would have made a great Guardians 3 movie, and it potentially would have made a great Thor 4 movie. But what we got was a quick 5-10 minute ending of his relationship with the Guardians, him going off on his own adventure, them going off to do what they were going to do in Guardians 3, and it just really was a setup at the end of Endgame that completely let us down because it didn't end up going anywhere. I should have known from there that the movie was going to go downhill from there, but honestly, I held out hope in the theaters, and now that I know better, I know not to expect much more from the rest of this movie. Now, I'm not going to do a whole play-by-play of this movie and ultimately what happens throughout it. I'm just kind of talking about my experience with this movie. I think that where they ended up with him having this emotional reaction with Jane when she was passing and just out of nowhere becoming a father and how that's all of a sudden his purpose now, I think that was shoehorned into the end of the movie just to give some sense of something happened in this movie that is worth you watching this movie, because if those things didn't happen, this movie would have been completely skippable. There would have been no point in watching Thor 4, and so of course they had to shoehorn something in to make it to where in the next Avengers movie when he shows up with a kid next to him, everyone's going to be like, where did this kid come from? And you're going to have watched the fourth Thor movie to be able to get some sense of what the heck is going on. And so because of that blatant shoehorning, that just completely killed the movie for me. I think that this movie would have been far better off if it held some more emotional stakes throughout the movie and did a better job of setting up his relationship with Jane. Honestly, she didn't even have to die at the end. I think that what they could have done was him maturing and just getting over this relationship that he just all of a sudden feel like he needed to bring up and just reignite the spark just because he physically sees Jane again. That honestly, if he were to just mature and grow up and both of them go their separate ways, I think that would have been a healthier end to that relationship. And if his ultimate job was to become a father in the end, then I think they could have done a better job of building up some sort of fatherly relationship, maybe sprinkled in some more scenes of him speaking to the kids of Asgard, to where it just wasn't completely left field with him taking on Gorr's daughter. Where Ragnarok shined, where this movie didn't, was it showed real emotion between the struggle between Thor wanting to move on and just be a character that is no longer holding on to Loki and his pranks and trying to build a relationship with him, but you feel that sense of struggle with Loki, that he just knows nothing more than just to be the prankster and trickster that he is. And so you feel not only a growth in emotional bondage between Thor and Loki, but you also feel a sense of maturity in both Thor's character individually and Loki's character individually in growing up past what they used to be, which for Thor was the show-off character that we saw in the first Thor movie to this mature hero and avenger that he is now, and Loki being the trickster that he always was and eventually growing past that to have real emotion and connection with somebody else. Instead, we get Thor in this movie being a completely insecure, pretty much peacock in the sense of needing to really spread out his colors and show who he is and show all these amazing powers, but honestly not having anything deeper to show for it past the exterior shell. So it really just devolved Thor into this character that at this point is just kind of this humorous side character that can be insanely powerful when the script calls for it, but honestly is a shame given who he was in the previous movies and where he ended up in Endgame. I mean, this is the same Thor that lost to Thanos and in the first 15 minutes of the next movie cut Thanos' head off and simply said he went for the head. So this guy has vengeance, he means what he says. But instead, we get a Thor that summons the Bifrost and falls somewhere off screen as a comedic act. Again, I loved this movie when I first saw it. I thought it was hilarious to see, but honestly, his de-evolution as a character just completely killed it for me. But speaking of Thanos like we did just a second ago, can you imagine if Thanos actually won and beat all of the Avengers? Check out this video right here where I go over probably the best Thanos storyline in all of comics history. I'll catch you in the next video. Peace.